You'd think anyone would think twice before messing with a natural waterway. But not Karen. She was the HOA president and firmly believed that whatever she disliked simply shouldn't exist. When she ordered her handymen to pour cement into the creek that flowed through the back of my property and behind hers, she had no idea she'd just rerouted nature's wrath straight into her own home. But I knew it the moment I saw the cement mixer and the confused workers blocking off the gentle stream that had run behind our neighborhood since before the homes were even built. If you enjoy stories where arrogant HOA Karens get instant karma served in gallons of murky water, then stop what you're doing and subscribe to Sham Stories right now, because this one's going to flood you with satisfaction. Let me rewind. Just a few weeks before the chaos started, my name is Chris, and my wife Jenna and I live on the edge of a semi-rural, OR-run community where most of the houses were built along a small creek that runs year-round. That creek isn't just pretty, it's also legally protected as a natural drainage channel, meaning no one is allowed to block or modify it. Everyone knows this. Well, everyone except Karen. She moved into the house behind ours about a year ago. And ever since she became HOA president, she's made it her mission to control everything. From how many garden gnomes someone could have on their lawn to what color mulch you used. But the moment Karen found out the creek ran through her backyard, she decided it was an eyesore and a breeding ground for snakes. Despite never seeing one, she wanted it gone and made her intentions very clear during the last HOA meeting when she brought it up as unnecessary water flow. I immediately stood up and explained that the creek was a protected stream that couldn't be modified without government permits, environmental studies, and, basic common sense. Karen scoffed and said, "We'll see about that." I should have known she meant it literally. A few days later, I came home to find a concrete truck and 3 workers in high visibility vests setting up barriers around the creek behind her house. They were in the process of pouring a thick layer of cement straight into the water. Ran out, yelled at them to stop, and demanded to know who approved this. One of them pointed to Karen, who was standing on her deck sipping lemonade like she was overseeing a pool installation. I took photos and videos and immediately called the county's environmental services department. They told me they'd send someone out, but enforcement took time, and by then the damage could be irreversible. The next morning, I walked out back and found the creek water already backing up. The cement hadn't fully blocked it yet, but it had narrowed the flow significantly, and the stream that used to gently trickle past my yard now looked like it was swelling with confusion. I warned Karen again, face to face this time, that not only was she violating environmental law, but she was putting all the homes downstream, including hers, at risk. She told me to mind my own yard and that the HOA voted to beautify the neighborhood. When I asked for a copy of that vote, she just slammed her door in my face. Now, this is where her arrogance went from annoying to criminal. Over. The next week, Karen had the workers pour more cement until the water had nowhere to go except up. My backyard began to flood a little, and so did my neighbor Tom's yard. Tom, a retired civil engineer, told Karen flat out she was causing a serious problem and that storm season was only a few days away. She ignored him too. At that point, I started gathering evidence, photos, videos, text messages from other neighbors, and copies of emails I'd sent to the HOA board. A few neighbors were on our side, but most were scared of Karen or indifferent. Meanwhile, the concrete hardened, the water kept rising, and then the clouds rolled in. The storm came in hard that Thursday night, and it poured for hours. I stayed up late watching the floodwaters creep up, checking that my basement sump pumps were working, and texting updates to Tom. But at around 3 a.m., I heard what sounded like a waterfall. I ran outside in the rain and saw something I'll never forget: the water, blocked from flowing down its natural creek bed, had pooled so high that it began flowing backward and sideways, looking for the path of least resistance. That path, Karen's basement window wells. I could see the water gushing over the concrete barrier, like it was trying to escape her insanity and pouring right into her foundation vents and basement windows. The next morning, once the storm cleared, I saw county workers and environmental officers walking through the neighborhood with clipboards and cameras. Turns out someone from the county finally took my complaint seriously and had shown up just in time to witness the disaster unfold in real time. I walked over and met one of the officials who was already documenting the flooding. This all came from that? He asked, pointing at the creek turn dam behind Karen's house. Exactly, I replied. She's been pouring concrete in it for weeks. They took my statement, and I handed over everything: videos, dates, even the license plate of the cement truck. But nothing was more satisfying than what happened next. Karen came stomping outside in rubber boots, her face red, hair soaked, and yelled, "Someone needs to fix this mess. My basement is under 2 feet of water." One of the officers calmly turned to her and said, "Ma'am, you're under investigation for illegal water diversion and unauthorized environmental modification. Please stay where you are." Karen froze. Must have thought her HOA status made her immune to real-world consequences. The water had no such loyalty. A week later, the cleanup crews were still pumping gallons of dirty creek water out of her basement. Mold had already started growing. The cement barrier was jackhammered apart by county workers, who were visibly annoyed to be doing this kind of job in the middle of storm season. Karen tried to file a complaint against me for harassment, but it backfired completely when all the evidence I had showed she'd created a disaster. She was fined over $80,000 in environmental penalties, had her HOA presidency stripped by a board vote, and according to the grapevine was slapped with a lawsuit from the county itself. Meanwhile, my creek flowed freely again, more peacefully than ever, almost like nature itself was breathing a sigh of relief. And from that day on, anytime someone brought up Karen, we just nodded toward her still damp house with a chuckle. After the disaster unfolded and Karen's basement was officially declared a biohazard zone by the inspection crew due to mold and stagnant water buildup, you'd think she would have disappeared quietly into the shadows, licking her wounds and perhaps learning something about humility, or at least local water codes. But no, not Karen. Within days of the county intervention, she began crafting a new narrative, claiming that the creek had been dangerously unstable for years, and that her beautification efforts were in fact an attempt to protect the community. She even went as far as trying to host a neighborhood awareness meeting in front of her house, complete with folding chairs, lemonade, and a typed-up report she'd authored herself, full of bogus statistics and blurry aerial images. From Google Maps, only 3 people showed up, 2 of whom were just walking their dogs and paused out of curiosity. Meanwhile, the rest of us were dealing with the aftermath of her arrogance. Tom and I spent several days helping neighbors dry out low-lying garages and crawl spaces that had taken on unexpected water due to the redirected creek. The county's Environmental Enforcement Department had now placed bright orange warning signs at the back of Karen's property, labeling it an active restoration zone, meaning she couldn't so much as plant a flower back there without approval. When she tried to argue with one of the county workers about removing the signs, he simply handed her a printed copy of the local environmental protection laws and walked away. Karen fumed, muttering about lawyers and conspiracies, but the damage to her reputation was already cemented, pun entirely intended. The HOA board, now scrambling to distance themselves from her, called for an emergency vote. I was surprised to get a knock on my door from Beverly, one of the board members who'd previously supported Karen, who now looked genuinely ashamed. "Chris," she said, "we're holding a special session tonight. We want to formally remove Karen from the presidency and dissolve her current project authorizations." I nodded, agreeing to attend. Not just for myself, but for every neighbor who had suffered because of Karen's reckless decision. That night, the HOA meeting was standing room only. People who hadn't shown up in years were present, most carrying folders of documentation, pictures, and anecdotes about Karen's rule. One neighbor, an elderly gentleman named George, stood and read aloud a complaint Karen had filed against his grandchildren for using chalk on his own driveway. Another woman brought up the time Karen threatened to have her fined for installing a too large mailbox, even though it had been HOAA approved 10 years earlier. Then I stood up and walked through everything I had documented: the cement trucks, the environmental violation notices, the video of the water cascading into her basement like a raging river looking for justice. The board didn't even debate it for more than 10 minutes before they held the vote. Karen was out immediately. There was a collective exhale from the room, followed by scattered applause. It felt like a regime had fallen, and peace could finally return. Karen didn't take her dethronement quietly. The very next morning, A massive for sale sign appeared in her front yard, but rather than just selling her house and moving on, she posted flyers across the neighborhood and in several local Facebook groups, claiming the HOA had been hijacked by radicals and that she was pursuing legal action against the county for wrongful interference. She even claimed she was documenting everything for a future lawsuit and began filming herself walking around the neighborhood with a selfie stick like she was some citizen journalist uncovering a conspiracy. Naturally, this just made things worse. At this point, even the neighbors who had been on the fence about Karen turned away from her completely. One by one, they removed themselves from her private Facebook group, unfollowed her online, and posted support for the environmental department's actions. No. Tom and I became minor neighborhood heroes and official stewards of the creek. The county began a proper assessment of the damage and announced plans to restore the natural stream using state funds and amusingly fines collected from Karen's violations. They even invited me to walk the site with the restoration team. I'll never forget the moment the county hydrologist looked at the concrete dam Karen had created and said, "This might be the dumbest attempt at water management I've ever seen." It was poetic. But even as progress moved forward, we discovered more of the mess Karen had left behind. The cement hadn't just blocked the creek, it had rerouted natural water runoff from other homes and caused erosion near the foundation of 2 other houses downstream. The county was now in talks with those homeowners to provide assistance, but it would take months to fix. Karen's house, meanwhile, sat half empty. She rarely came outside now, and when she did, it was to bark at the environmental crews for being too loud or to shout at kids for riding their bikes near her lawn. The final straw came when she tried to install a private property fence that would have crossed directly into the protected creek zone. A county inspector arrived that same afternoon and handed her a cease and desist notice, along with a warning that if she attempted one more violation, she could be facing jail time. That finally seemed to break her spirit. Within a week, the for sale sign was updated to price reduced, and a listing appeared online describing the home as having unique water features. A hilarious way to describe a basement that still smelled like catfish. By now, my wife and I had planted some native wildflowers along the creek's edge. And with the restoration underway, frogs, dragonflies, and even a couple of herons began returning to the area. It was almost like nature knew it was safe again. The neighborhood started healing. 2 people were friendlier. And for the first time in months, our HOA meetings were constructive instead of combative. We voted in a new president, a quiet but sensible woman named Carol, who immediately instituted transparency rules, requiring all project proposals to be submitted in writing with proper permits. Karen's era had officially ended. But as peaceful as things became, we all kept an eye on her house, half expecting her to try one last stunt before leaving for good. And we were right because she wasn't finished yet. Karen's silence didn't last long. Just as the neighborhood began to relax, thinking her era of control and destruction had finally passed, an unsettling buzz rippled through the block one Friday morning when a flatbed truck rolled into Karen's driveway carrying what appeared to be massive stacks of metal fencing, PVC pipes, and construction-grade tarps. At first, we thought it was part of the restoration plan or maybe even a move-out cleanup service. But when Karen strutted out in a neon safety vest and began giving orders to a trio of rough-looking workers she'd hired, it became clear that she had something else in mind entirely. She was trying to build a DIY retention pond in her backyard, over the section of creek that the county had already labeled as protected. It was like she learned absolutely nothing from the disaster she had already caused. The workers, looking confused but paid well enough not to ask questions, began digging shallow trenches around the filled-in cement, attempting to lay out some sort of makeshift water barrier system. Karen, armed with printed-out articles from dubious websites and a clipboard covered in red ink, kept waving them in the workers' faces, barking phrases like natural flow redirection, sovereign property rights, and common law, easement. A few neighbors gathered nearby, stunned. I called Tom, and he came jogging over, jaw-dropping as he watched one of the workers use a jackhammer to crack open the previous cement pour Karen had dumped into the creek. "She's digging into the illegal cement," Tom said slowly, to install more illegal piping. It was almost too absurd to comprehend. Naturally, I contacted the county inspector immediately, but Karen, apparently expecting pushback, handed one of the workers a rolled-up tarp and began covering the site with camo netting, as if hiding. Her backyard engineering marvel would prevent any officials from noticing. But the environmental team didn't need to notice, they already had Karen's address flagged. 2 days later, the same inspector who had previously warned Karen returned, accompanied this time by a county enforcement officer.
Ow.
They walked straight into her backyard while she protested loudly about private land, and then proceeded to cite her for 4 new violations, including tampering with protected land, illegal construction without permits, and endangerment of local wildlife. When the officer mentioned the fine could now cross into 5 figures, Karen's face turned bright red, and she screamed something about state tyranny before storming back into her house. But the bigger twist came just a day later, when we found out through county public records that Karen had never legally owned the tiny sliver of land where the creek ran through the back of her property. Years ago, due to a surveying error, the strip had remained designated as public watershed land and was technically not part of any homeowner's deed, including hers. She had literally cemented over land that didn't belong to her. This revelation opened the floodgates, figuratively and almost literally. The county escalated the case, launching a legal review not just into her actions, but into how she had managed to get HOA funds approved for her cement operation in the first place. Rumors spread fast, and several past board members came forward admitting Karen had threatened them or manipulated board meetings by filing fake safety complaints against neighbors who disagreed with her. One even admitted that Karen had faked emails from city officials to make it seem like she had clearance for her creek project. This turned the county's investigation into a criminal inquiry. Karen was now being looked at for fraud, property tampering, and falsifying documents. We saw less and less of her after that. Her house grew quiet again, but this time it wasn't defiance, it was fear. Word on the street was that her attorney had advised her to stop all contact with the HOA, neighbors, and county staff until things were resolved. Still, the damage she caused had long-term consequences. The restoration crew had to halt progress temporarily to assess whether her second round of backyard tampering had introduced new toxins into the water supply. They found elevated levels of concrete residue and plastic particles, likely from the pipes and tarps she'd tried to install, which delayed the entire recovery plan by at least 3 weeks. I walked the edge of the creek daily, now feeling more like a caretaker than a homeowner, ensuring no new surprises surfaced. It became a sort of ritual, coffee in hand, boots on, stepping along the gentle slope of wildflowers and fresh grass that were beginning to reclaim the banks. Neighbors began joining me. First Tom, then Beverly, and even George, who once had no interest in anything HOA related, came with a small rake and trash bag to help clean debris. Karen had unknowingly built a stronger community, just not in the way she intended. Her actions had galvanized everyone against her, uniting a neighborhood that had once been fractured by petty HOA disputes into something almost resembling a team. Meanwhile, Karen's house listing remained active, but untouched. Rumors spread that several potential buyers had canceled viewings after hearing about the fines and the legal drama attached to the property. One even posted a 1-star Google review about the neighborhood, calling it hostage to one woman's ego. The final blow came when the county placed a temporary lien on her home pending the results of the environmental audit, essentially freezing any sale until the legal process concluded. Karen had not only destroyed her own credibility, she'd trapped herself financially. It was poetic justice served by Mother Nature herself. Still, we couldn't fully exhale yet. As long as she remained in that house, there was always a risk. She'd try something again. None of us were ready to let our guard down, not until we were sure she was gone for good. Just when we thought Karen had been backed into a corner she couldn't possibly claw her way out of, she did what no one expected. She filed a lawsuit against the county. She claimed the waterway behind her property had always been misclassified, arguing that the land she tampered with was rightfully hers based on a decades old Poorly scanned plat map she waved in front of a news crew that showed up after she sent out her own press release. That's right, Karen summoned the media. One morning we woke up to see a local news van parked on the street while Karen stood at the end of her driveway. Arms folded, giving a very one-sided interview to a camera crew about government. Overreach, deep state conspiracies, and a neighborhood mafia operating through HOA funds. It was surreal. The neighbors stood on their porches sipping coffee like it was a community theater performance. The anchor clearly didn't know how to handle her rant. And when Tom tried to step in to offer the neighborhood's side, Karen accused him of being part of a shadow cabal trying to silence her. The segment never aired, of course, but the footage somehow leaked online, going mildly viral on a subreddit dedicated to HOA horror stories. The comments were brutal. People picked apart her argument, posted county water zoning records, and even found drone footage of the cement she dumped during her creek restoration, which only served to embarrass her further. But instead of pulling back, she doubled down. Her attorney, some poor soul, likely dragged into this for a retainer. Fia filed motions to delay the county's enforcement actions while she pursued the lawsuit. What she didn't expect was that the county wasn't just sitting still. While she was staging her media circus, a forensic accountant was poring through the HOA's financial records from the last 5 years. Turns out Karen had been funneling money into landscape emergencies and storm mitigation response projects, many of which had no receipts or verification of work done. The total unaccounted for funds, over $47,000. At the next emergency HOA meeting, which was packed with angry homeowners, county prosecutor presented preliminary evidence and opened the floor for community testimony. One by one, people stood up to share their experiences with Karen. How she threatened fines for leaving trash bins out. How she once trespassed on someone's property to measure their grass with a tape measure, and how she approved projects that only seemed to benefit her backyard. It was a public shaming unlike anything we'd seen. Karen didn't attend the meeting, of course. She had barricaded herself in her home with private property, no trespassing signs taped to her windows, and a camera pointing at her own mailbox. Then the first real storm of the season hit. Heavy rains soaked the region for 3 straight days, and that's when nature finally had her say. The makeshift drainage setup Karen had attempted, the one the county warned her was not only illegal, but dangerously flawed, collapsed under the weight of runoff. Water surged across the cemented-over creek bed, following the path it had carved for generations, but this time it had no exit. The underground pipe she'd tried to install with unpermitted labor cracked under pressure and redirected water straight toward her house. We all heard the snapping, the loud, hollow pop of concrete giving way, and then the unmistakable gush. By the time anyone realized what was happening, Karen's entire backyard was a marsh, and it didn't stop there. The water pooled against her foundation, found a breach in her basement wall where she had hastily installed some kind of sump pump bypass, and began pouring into her basement at a frightening rate. Within an hour, she had over 2 feet of water flooding her lower floor. She tried to bail it out with buckets at first. When that failed, she called 911. The firefighters who showed up had already been briefed about her situation, and per policy, they made sure she was safe but refused to pump the water out of a home compromised by illegal construction. All they could do was help her shut off electricity and recommend a cleanup service. We watched from across the street as Karen, soaked and screaming, stood ankle-deep in muddy water, while fishy-ass actual fish from upstream darted around the floor of her flooded basement. She had filled the creek with cement, and now nature had filled her home with the creek. Over the next few days, the footage made its way online. First through a neighbor's doorbell camera, then from a drone flyover a teenager posted on TikTok. The title, HOA. Karen turns basement into aquarium. It gained millions of views. People from all over started chiming in, engineers, environmentalists, even legal analysts weighing in on how badly she'd botched her lawsuit in her backyard. Karen's notoriety was no longer local. She was now the face of HOA corruption. Online. But the fallout wasn't just online. Insurance refused to cover the flood damage due to her unauthorized work. The county issued an emergency order to begin restoration on her property whether she consented or not. meaning she'd now be charged for any cleanup or reconstruction work the public crews had to do. Worse still, her lawsuit against the county was dismissed before it ever made it to hearing. The judge, after reviewing the mountain of evidence in Karen's now infamous online meltdown, wrote a scathing summary judgment essentially calling her claims baseless and her actions dangerous. Her attorney dropped her as a client the next day, as the neighborhood felt like it had survived a natural disaster. And in many ways we had, but it wasn't the rain. It was Karen. Still, we weren't celebrating yet. Her house stood there, soggy and silent, a reminder that as long as she hadn't moved out or been forcibly removed, the chaos wasn't truly over. Not yet. In the weeks following the flood, Karen's house sat in a state of decay that even the most indifferent observer couldn't ignore. The once meticulously trimmed hedges wilted under stagnant puddles, mold-blackened curtains hung limp in the windows, and the smell, an unbearable mix of mildew, sewage, and rotting drywall, wafted across neighboring yards on humid days. No one saw Karen in public. Her car hadn't moved from the driveway, where weeds had begun to creep up around the tires. Rumors circulated about her staying at a motel outside town, or possibly squatting inside her ruined home in denial. Few brave neighbors attempted wellness checks, knocking on the door and calling out, but she never responded. Then one day, without warning, a "For Sale by Owner" sign appeared in the front yard. The sign was crooked, hastily hammered into the soggy lawn, and bore her handwriting thick red marker, reading "Cash buyers only. No. Lowball's ass is." It was a desperate act, but no one was surprised. The home was now considered a biohazard site, with county inspectors posting a red condemned notice on the front window, citing structural compromise due to flooding and unpermitted excavation. Still, Karen was trying to squeeze money out of it, as if sheer willpower could turn her disaster into profit. The HOA board, which had been entirely reshuffled since the scandal, had officially voted to bar her from participating in any future association leadership or voting activities. They even renamed the annual picnic from Creekside Social to Community Renewal Day, a subtle jab at Karen's misdeeds. At the same time, the county finished its forensic audit and filed formal charge embezzlement, environmental tampering, falsifying HOA documents, and multiple counts of fraud. The local sheriff's department issued a warrant and deputies attempted to serve it, but Karen wasn't home. That's when the case took a darker turn. Cameras from nearby houses captured the moment authorities broke down her door only to find the house completely abandoned. Clothes, furniture, electronics all gone. The place had been gutted. The only thing left behind was a large binder labeled HOA Operations, Karen's Eyes Only, and a poorly taped envelope on the fridge reading "To whom it may concern." Inside the envelope was a handwritten screed blaming everyone in the neighborhood for turning against her. She claimed the flood was a government psyop, the HOA board was infiltrated by anarchists, and that the only solution was to go dark until the system collapses. Authorities traced her phone to a burner number that pinged in Arizona briefly, then vanished. A federal agency got involved mainly due to the environmental damage and possible interstate financial fraud. Suddenly, our quiet community became part of a wider investigation. Karen had not just ruined her own property, she'd allegedly laundered HOA money into offshore crypto wallets and purchased land under shell companies across state lines. We were dumbfounded. She had always seemed like a control-obsessed tyrant, but this was criminal genius or complete madness. A local journalist ran a series of exposes on the saga, dubbing it the Cement Creek Conspiracy. Interviews with past HOA vendors revealed that Karen had insisted on cash payments and refused to allow any third-party inspections of work she commissioned. One contractor admitted he was told to pour fast and don't ask questions. He walked off the job halfway through and never got paid. The public response was swift and brutal. Karen became the face of HOA corruption gone nuclear. Memes flooded social media, her face photoshopped into fish tanks, cement trucks, and mugshot templates. One particularly viral video showed someone reenacting her backyard disaster using action figures and a toy hose. Late-night comedians joked about her. A documentary crew even reached out to the HOA board about filming a limited series. Amid the chaos, a quiet hero emerged, Mrs. Henderson. The elderly woman who lived 2 houses down from Karen, she had kept a meticulous diary, complete with photos, HOA newsletters, email printouts, and even screenshots of Karen's social media rants. She handed it over to investigators without hesitation. That diary became the backbone of the case against Karen. In a community meeting held weeks later, federal agents confirmed that they were pursuing her as a fugitive, but they reassured residents that restitution would be sought from assets traced back to her holdings. Meanwhile, a county crew began the slow and costly process of restoring the creek. The cement was jackhammered out in sections, the underground pipes dismantled, and native plants reintroduced to stabilize the banks. It was beautiful to watch nature reclaim its path. Frogs returned, dragonflies hovered, and the soft gurgle of water running free again became the soundtrack to our evenings. Still, Karen's house remained, an empty, gutted shell. The county planned to demolish it, but a debate stirred should it be flattened quietly or preserved as a cautionary tale. Some neighbors suggested turning the lot into a public garden named Second Chances, while others pushed for complete erasure. The board voted unanimously for the garden. Construction began the following month, and neighbors volunteered to help. It was therapeutic, tearing out the remnants of Karen's tyranny and planting seeds in its place. Flowers bloomed where her surveillance cameras once glared. A bench was installed under an old oak tree with a small plaque reading, "Let the creek flow and let peace grow." We all knew Karen could still be out there, watching from the shadows, plotting her next move, but we didn't care. Her power was gone. Her empire of threats and citations had crumbled under the weight of her own arrogance. We had taken back our community, and for the first time in years it felt like home again. Months passed, and the seasons shifted from warm to cold, from the murky humidity of late summer to the crisp clarity of fall. The creek, now fully restored, became a symbol of healing for everyone in our neighborhood. Emily's began gathering. Along its banks again, children splashing stones, neighbors walking dogs, and old couples resting on benches with warm drinks in hand. Every inch of the garden that replaced Karen's old lot began to flourish with color, supported by both the county and volunteers who rotated weekly to tend the space. That little corner, once a place of conflict and control, was now alive with laughter, flowers, and fresh air. Meanwhile, the hunt for Karen continued. News updates were less frequent now, though occasionally a headline would pop up online, "Fugitive HOA President Still Missing," or "Authorities Expand Search for Cement Creek Conspirator." People speculated she was in Mexico or maybe hiding, in an RV disguised as a snowbird tourist, but the FBI wasn't giving up. Then one morning in early December, the peace was broken by a sudden frenzy of sirens and agents swarming a small lakeside cabin 3 towns over. A neighbor tipped off police after recognizing Karen from a viral meme and spotting her at a gas station. Same smug smirk, same manicured nails, but now wearing a cheap wig and oversized sunglasses. When they burst into the cabin, they found her seated at a fold-up card table, covered in HOA documents, scribbling furiously with red marker onto maps and county deeds. She had evidently been planning a new neighborhood one. She could control completely, with fake buyers lined up through burner emails and cash-only deposits. She didn't resist arrest. Instead, she calmly stood, placed her pen down, and said, "You're ruining my legacy." The story made national news within hours. Images of Karen being escorted out in handcuffs, still dressed like a suburban queen gone rogue, plastered every media outlet. Her charges now included conspiracy, identity fraud, environmental crime, and resisting court orders. During interrogation, she confessed that the cementing of the creek was intentional and personal. She had been enraged by years of feeling slighted, disrespected, and, in her words, underestimated by small minds with smaller dreams. She blamed the town for rejecting her vision of HOA perfection and claimed her actions were a necessary sacrifice for order. It was chilling. She had convinced herself she was some sort of martyr for neighborhood tyranny. Defense team tried arguing diminished capacity, citing stress, early onset dementia, and trauma from a prior failed marriage as reasons behind her behavior. But the evidence was too strong, too overwhelming, and too public. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Guilty on all counts. Karen was sentenced to 35 years without parole, to be served in a federal prison designated for white-collar offenders and eco-criminals. When the judge handed down the sentence, Karen laughed a shrill, humorless cackle that echoed in the courtroom, then turned to the gallery and hissed, "You'll thank me when it all falls apart." That was the last anyone in town saw of her in person. Back home, the community gathered for what became known as the Creek Celebration. It was part party, part memorial, and all catharsis. People shared stories of Karen's rule, laughing and crying in equal measure. Someone brought a cake decorated with blue frosting and tiny plastic fish. A group of kids put on a skit reenacting the Great Flood, complete with cardboard props and a girl in a blonde wig yelling about HOA fees. Even former board members returned, sheepish but relieved, expressing gratitude that the neighborhood had survived and was stronger than before. The garden, now officially renamed Karen's Folly, had a new plaque installed by the bench that read, "Let this stand as a reminder. Power without compassion is just cement in the creek." That line was later quoted in a local college ethics course and appeared in regional newspapers as the perfect summation of suburban overreach gone berserk. But life moved on. The empty spaces Karen left on the board in her house and in the psyche of the neighborhood were slowly filled with community, creativity, and cautious hope. New elections were held. New bylaws were written, with protections against authoritarian control and clauses ensuring transparency. Open forums and environmental stewardship. Volunteers began teaching kids about ecology using the restored creek. As a learning site, a small annual scholarship was even created in Mrs. Henderson's name, given to students who planned to study environmental law or community planning. And yet, even in the peace, echoes of Karen lingered. Some claimed to have seen her face in strange places' graffiti tags, doctored memes, even a prank bobblehead someone left in the HOA clubhouse as a joke. Her legacy, twisted and tragic, became a cautionary tale passed down with a shudder and a chuckle. Occasionally a newcomer would ask, "Who was Karen really?" And the response would always begin the same. "Well, let me tell you about the creek, the cement, and the fish tank basement, ... It became neighborhood lore, mythologized over time but rooted in truth. Because no matter how far she ran, or how deeply she deluded herself, the fact remained. She tried to control nature, and nature doesn't negotiate. And even more dangerous, she tried to control people, forgetting that community isn't built with rules and threats but with trust, patience, and shared humanity. Karen forgot that, but we remembered. Every time we heard the soft burble of water in the creek, every time a frog leapt from the reeds, every time someone said, "Let's take it to a vote." Our strength wasn't in our fences, our fees, or our bylaws. It was in our ability to come together after chaos, to learn, to forgive, and to plant something new where once there was cement. Karen lost everything trying to rule. We found everything by learning to listen. Winter melted into spring, and the soft thaw brought with it fresh life. Not only to the revived creek, but to the entire neighborhood that had once lived under Karen's iron grip. The story of Karen and her cemented wrath faded from daily conversation, but lingered like a cautionary wind that occasionally swept through council meetings or garden events. People remembered, but they had also begun to laugh againoply, joyfully, like a community that had passed through fire and found itself forged stronger. The garden where Karen's house once stood was now a sanctuary. Local artists painted murals on the surrounding fences. Children planted native flowers with names they proudly recited to visitors, and elderly residents gathered every Thursday afternoon to sip lemonade while watching dragonflies skim the creek's clear surface. It was in that gentle peace that a strange rumor began to spread, a whisper that traveled from porch to porch, mailbox to mailbox. Someone had been receiving postcards, unsigned, postmarked from states far and wide. The cards had odd messages, like "Watch the water" or "HOA was only the beginning." And even more cryptic ones, "Creek beds hold secrets deeper than you know." At first, folks laughed it off as a prank, maybe some kid with too much time or someone nostalgic for drama. But then a council member named Alan once a silent ally of Karen's, received one with his childhood nickname on it, something no one else would know. Others followed, each more unnerving, each addressed in Karen's unmistakable cursive. The police dismissed it as a hoax. The FBI said it wasn't enough for investigation. But we all knew Karen might be locked up, but her influence had roots that hadn't fully died. One night, long after the sun had dipped behind the distant hills, I walked down to the creek, flashlight in hand. The water glistened, soft ripples catching the moonlight, frogs chirping in the distance. But what caught my eye wasn't natural. Small, artificial shape protruded just beneath the bridge, a black waterproof case, wedged into the embankment. I pulled it out, opened it, and found inside a thumb drive. A stack of photos of HOA members from towns I didn't recognize, and a document labeled Phase 2. My stomach turned cold. The drive contained notes, detailed plans, schematics, diagrams written in the same obsessive handwriting Karen used on her HOA agendas. Town after town, mapped and listed with vulnerable HOA boards, water features, and legal loopholes. Karen had been part of something bigger. Or maybe she was the ringleader all along. I turned everything over to the authorities. They launched an investigation that's still ongoing. We were told little, only that we'd stumbled onto a broader conspiracy of coordinated property takeovers. The phrase sent chills through the town. We had barely escaped a full-scale collapse of our own neighborhood. What if others weren't so lucky? Media crews returned. This time, the headlines were darker, deeper. Karen wasn't just a villain with a grudge. She might have been a mastermind with a blueprint. Across the country, HOA scandals began surfacing. Secret property transfers, forged signatures, poured in ecologically protected areas. Damn, and in every case, a connection traced back, but undeniable, to our own Karen. Yet, despite everything, we didn't let fear undo what we had rebuilt. Doubled down on transparency, created community-led audits, began teaching neighborhood students about property law and environmental protection. Karen's basement may have once looked like a fish tank, but her real legacy was far murkier. She had tried to drown us in control, but we learned to swim upstream. And maybe that was the most unexpected outcome of all. Not revenge, not punishment, but resilience. We grew stronger, not because we erased Karen from our memory, but because we refused to let her define our future. And if one day she finds a way to send more chaos from behind her prison walls or through her mysterious allies, she'll find we're ready, united, watchful, and never again silent. Because the creek flows freely now, just like the truth. If you want more shocking stories like this, true tales of suburban chaos, revenge, and justice served cold, then don't wait. Hit that subscribe button and join us on Sham Stories, where the truth always finds a way to surface.